This tutorial is the second part in a four-part series on building a simple order processing web service with Sparx Systems Enterprise Architect and Talend ESB. First part walked through the service order web service and demonstrated how a calling client could contact this service, which would result in a record being written to the database and a unique identifier being returned in response. This is a graphical representation of a WSDL that I'm going to generate from Enterprise Architect. There's a single service SV order. There is a single binding BD order, which is a SOAP document style binding. There is a single operation OP process order. If you're running within Talend ESB, you can only have one operation. If you export, that restriction is lifted. And there are two types that are used for the input-output pattern that's supporting the operation. One is gathering parameters that's going to result in the database write, and the second is a response record that's going to convey the unique order identifier that's generated. So I take this in this screen, I'm going to generate the WSDL. It puts the WSDL in a file called order WSDL. Now I've got order WSDL loaded up here in another tool called Liquid XML Studio, and you can see that there's it's a pretty straightforward document, very close to what's generated by Talend Open Studio. In this case, we're following what's called a contract first implementation. We're building our web services from the WSDL contract. In Talend, you also have the option to generate the WSDL after you've implemented something. So in this Talend Open Studio screen, I've got a database connection to my SQL database. There's tons of posts on the Bekwam blog on how to work with Microsoft SQL. So I start by creating a service, and I'm going to call this SV order. I'm going to import an existing WSDL. It's right here called order. Okay. And we can look at it graphically. It looks similar to what I had in EA as far as a service box and a port type box. Now what this has done is it's also added something to the repository for the data types that are going to be manipulated and adapted in my processing. These were located in the type section of the WSDL, and they come right into the repository, and you're going to see how we use them in a few minutes. So from this service here, because we have the single operation, I can use this create new job, and this is going to be the job that I run from the IDE. And the new job starts with two components that are tuned to the specific web service. Now within here, I'm going to use a few other components. I'll start off with my message transports, and that's going to take two XML maps to serialize the data to something that can be worked on with the database components and then back out again for the response. With the databases, I'm going to use my MySQL MS SQL components, and I'll take a close for the end of the job. I'll take a commit for the middle of the job to commit it with every invocation. A connection at the start, I'll acquire a connection. I'll take a last insert ID, and then finally I'm looking for an output, which will output the results of the transformation. I'll connect these up real quick after I set my schema here. Start off with a repository property. I've got this pointing to some local database. Auto commit is off. I'm going to trigger it when the subjob is okay, and when this subjob is okay, I will close the connection. Now I don't really care since I have a commit. Sometimes I put a commit here and sort of close it en route, but that's not important because I'm doing the commit in the middle of the processing. So for the SQL output, I'm going to use the existing connection, and I'll also pull in an existing schema. And this is my order table here. I have to tweak this a little bit. I'm going to want to get the last insert ID, so I have to take off the batch here. And for the field options, I don't want to insert into the auto-generated key, so I'm going to do this as well. Okay, and so when I form my map, I'm going to call this an order, get the schema, then I'm going to go to the last insert ID. So now I pick up the insert ID, I pick up the commit, we'll make sure we don't close the connection, go over to the XML map, and finally I prepare my response. And that's it. Now the two remaining steps I have are both of these XML maps need to be wired up. So in this case, what I do is, in that first step when I imported into the WSDL into the repository, it also imported these types. So now I can hook up the input in this fashion here. And you can map like this. Oops. I have to do a few things to adjust, set a few types here, because my XML data is coming in as a string. Okay, and then I'm going to do the same thing on the response end. Go over to the response, import from repository, and there's the response. And this is going to be the last insert ID. And I'm going to do a quick check to make sure I've got all of the types lined up. This is now going to run it on the specified port. Port was specified in the WSDL. That looks good. So this is a working service, and it's implementing a database writing operation in between two XML maps. The next part will build on this by developing a client, and that client is going to actually call this. So we'll be testing this part in the next section of the series.